Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
The next chapter in Gonzalez's work is Imperial Restoration and Continuing Decay. So Pope Leo III, not to be confused with Emperor Leo III, whom we saw in the previous controversy over images. This time it's Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, Pepin's son, emperor on Christmas Day. The year was 800, thus reviving the ancient Roman Empire under the protection of the Church. So how interesting that we had the Eastern Empire. Now the empire was focused in Constantinople. So the Constantinople-centered empire, we know as the Byzantine Empire. What's happening now? The Pope is crowning another emperor for the Roman Empire in the West. Charlemagne ruled in civil and ecclesial matters. So what did Charlemagne do for the church? He appointed bishops. Wait a minute. He was the emperor. The emperor now was appointing bishops in the church. He enacted laws ordering preaching in the vernacular, in the people's languages. He declared Sunday a day of worship and rest. He collected tithes. Remember, 10% of your income goes to the church. He collected those as if they were taxes. And he began to reform monasteries with Benedict's rule. Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, continued those reforms. He continued the reformation of monasticism. He forbade bishops and clergy from wearing jewelry and ostentatious attire. He declared tithes obligatory for all people. Even if you're not Christian, everyone's going to pay tithes in this kingdom. And he revived the ancient custom allowing bishops to be elected by the people. How interesting. In the ancient church, bishops were elected by the people. Then after a while it became this, we were jockeying for power by determining who would appoint the bishops. He went back to that ancient practice of the people electing their bishops. Theological activity during this period of the church. The most influential voice, says Dr. Gonzalez, was John Scotus Erigena, who translated Pseudo-Dionysius to Latin and who helped to spread Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism, then, from our course in philosophy, remember then, was this mixing of philosophy with religious ideas, especially Platonic ideas with various religious ideas of how the world was created. Pseudo-Dionysius had what we refer to as the metaphysics of the good. Ooh, where have we seen that word, the good, with a capital G before? That was Platonic thought. So the metaphysics of the good was how it is that God is goodness that just keeps spilling over. He translated those works into Latin and was responsible for helping to spread Neoplatonism. In Spain, we had two bishops who were condemned, Elipandus of Toledo and Felix of Urgel, who were condemned for speaking of the two forms of sonship in Christ. They said that that Christ was God's son. He was eternally God's son and also was adopted. So adoptionism was later declared a heresy. That is that Jesus was a human like us, but was adopted by God as God's son. So that was a heresy. Gottschalk of Orbay was condemned for his preaching on Augustine's doctrine of predestination. How interesting. Earlier we saw how it was that Augustine's doctrine of predestination was sort of skipped over. Augustine had this idea of predestination, that before you were born, God knew the choices you were going to make. You were predestined in a certain direction. Either predestined for heaven, or, for you, predestined for hell. And if you're predestined for hell, is there anything that you can do to avoid going to hell at the end of your life? If you're predestined, that's your destiny. Sorry. So, needless to say, that thought of predestination was condemned. Piscatius Rudberitus, is that name Piscatius? Familiar from our course on sacramental theology from the Eucharist. Piscatius declared that the bread and the wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. Right? We refer to this as the somatic, real presence of Christ. That the bread really becomes Jesus' body, that the wine really becomes Jesus' blood. That we're tracing back to Piscatius during this era of the church in the 9th and 10th centuries. Paschasius, remember we also said that bread and the wine now, they cease being bread and wine. It's now the body and blood of Christ. It's the same body that was born of the Virgin, the same body that was crucified on the cross. That's the body that you munch with your teeth. You are munching Jesus' bones with your teeth. Your teeth are munching Jesus' bones. That was Paschasius. Ratramnus was tending more towards symbolism and said, wait a minute, communion is not about receiving the physical or the historical body of Jesus. It's more of a symbol. It would later become the more Protestant view, and the Catholic view in many places would be the more somatic, real presence of Christ. That somehow that bread and wine are changed into the body and blood. Somatic real presence was gaining hold and would result in the doctrine of a change of substance in the Fourth Lateran Council. 1215 was the year. Fourth Lateran Council declared the doctrine of transubstantiation. Transubstantiation, how it is that there's a change in substance of those. How interesting that in all of those, we were talking about the substance or the nature of the Father. The Father is Jesus is of the same substance, homoousios, of the same substance. Now we're talking in the Eucharist, the substance of the bread and the substance of the wine changes. Looks like bread, tastes like bread, smells like bread. The accidents remain, the substance changes. The papacy, what's happening in the papacy? If you had a chance to read ahead to this chapter, oh, what an intriguing time in the church. All of the violence and the corruption. The papacy became a prize that was fought over by different people, right? Different families are going to try to make sure that family members become popes, and different popes are going to make sure that other family members become popes. It's going to be fascinating. Popes succeed one another in rapid succession. They're often murdered or strangled or imprisoned, or there are all sorts of intriguing stories that we tell from this period. Pope Stephen VI, I could not make this up. We all know what a cadaver is. A cadaver is a dead body. He convened the Cadaveric Council, in which he dug up the remains of Pope Formosus, put the remains on trial, and then later mutilated the dead Pope's remains. Could a person make these things up? Craziness. Absolute. Exactly. So absolute craziness going on in the church. Pope Sergius imprisoned and killed 2 rival popes. And Sergius's lover, so the lover that he had on the side, her family wanted to make sure, and they did, make sure that her son and her nephew and her grandson all became future popes as well. All in the family, right? Wow. Emperor Otto III up in Germany named his 23-year-old nephew pope at one point. A 23-year-old pope, imagine the wisdom coming from him. The Counts of Tusculum named 3 popes, including a 15-year-old pope. Imagine the wisdom there. And King Henry III of Germany at one point intervened. He deposed 3 rival popes. 3 rival popes. What is all this saying? It's saying that at the time, the papacy, that people are fighting over the papacy, such that at one point, for instance, we're often accustomed to hearing of one bishop of Rome, but at this point, there are 2 popes or 3 popes at a time, where people come in and try to depose the 1 or the 2 or the 3 who are in power in order to put someone else in power. How it is that the Spirit works through all of this is an incredible, incredible thing for us as a church to look back and to see that somehow God has guided our church despite the very human people who have comprised our church. It was also King Henry III who convened a council after naming Pope Clement II, right? He got rid of 3 other rival popes in order to name his own Pope, Pope Clement II. Convened a council, and it was that council that denounced simony, or simony if you prefer. And simony, or simony, is the buying and selling of church positions, which simply meant that if you wanted to be a bishop, and if you had enough money, we'll make you a bishop. If you want to be a priest or a cardinal, we'll make you a cardinal. Right?